In the spring of 1077, before the first sunlight touched the tiled rooftops of Kaifeng, a grain barge drifted through the mist along the Grand Canal. Its cargo had begun its journey hundreds of kilometers away in the rice-growing south. Farmers had planted the crop months earlier. Laborers had harvested it. Local officials had recorded it. Merchants had arranged its transport. Now, before dawn, it was entering one of the largest cities on earth. Along the canal banks, the city was already awake. Porters carried sacks of grain toward warehouses. Shopkeepers unlatched wooden shutters. Clerks hurried through crowded streets carrying bundles of documents tied with silk cord. Boatmen shouted instructions across the water as dozens of vessels competed for space in the morning traffic. The scene would have seemed almost unbelievable to many visitors from Europe. If you enjoy learning about history, subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and share it with your friends. In the comments, let me know where you're listening from. I would love to hear from you. By the late 11th century, Kaifeng was not simply a political capital. It was the center of an economic machine operating on a scale few societies had ever achieved. Its population likely exceeded 1 million people. Markets stretched across entire districts. Workshops produced iron tools, paper, ceramics, books, and textiles in astonishing quantities. Goods arrived from every corner of the empire and departed just as quickly. Even more remarkable was what tied the entire system together. Much of the wealth moving through the city was not stored in gold. It was not carried by kings. It was not concentrated inside a single palace. It flowed through networks, through canals, markets, farms, workshops, ports, warehouses, tax offices, and merchant houses. For centuries, this system helped make China the richest civilization on earth. The achievement was so extraordinary that historians still debate how it happened. How did one civilization build cities larger than most of the world had ever seen? How did it create an economy capable of supporting more people, producing more goods, and generating more wealth than almost any of its rivals? And why, long before the rise of modern Europe, did so much of the world's commerce point toward China? The answers begin not in a period of prosperity, but in an age of fragmentation. When the Han Dynasty collapsed in 220 AD, political unity disappeared across much of China. Kingdoms fought for territory. Armies marched through farmland. Entire communities abandoned their homes. For generations, war and instability reshaped the landscape. Yet, hidden inside this turmoil was a development that would eventually transform Chinese history. Large numbers of people migrated south. Families crossed rivers, mountain ranges, and frontier regions in search of safety. What they found was land that had not yet reached its agricultural potential. The Yangtze River Basin and the regions beyond it contained fertile soils, abundant rainfall, and opportunities for expansion on a scale that earlier generations had barely imagined. The migration unfolded gradually over centuries. Forests were cleared, irrigation systems expanded, new settlements appeared. The areas that had once stood at the edges of Chinese civilization became some of its most productive regions. The consequences were profound. In pre-industrial societies, wealth began with food. Before factories, stock markets, and modern finance, prosperity depended on the ability to produce reliable agricultural surpluses. A society that could consistently feed large populations possessed advantages that echoed through every part of its economy. Southern China proved exceptionally good at producing food. Rice cultivation became the foundation of that success. Unlike many staple crops, rice could generate extraordinary yields when supported by irrigation, labor, and favorable environmental conditions. As production increased, so did population. Population growth created larger markets. Larger markets encouraged specialization, specialization encouraged trade, trade encouraged innovation. Over generations, these forces reinforced one another, transforming agricultural abundance into economic power. When political unity returned under the Sui dynasty in 581 and expanded further under the Tang dynasty, rulers inherited more than territory. They inherited the foundations of a future economic giant. Maintaining such a realm required more than armies. It required infrastructure capable of connecting distant regions into a single functioning system. Few projects demonstrated that ambition more clearly than the Grand Canal. Expanded under the Sui and improved by later dynasties, the canal linked the fertile south with the political centers of the north. Grain could move efficiently across enormous distances. Tax revenues reached the capital more reliably. Merchants gained access to markets that had once been difficult or impossible to reach. The canal did not create China's prosperity, it accelerated it. A farmer harvesting rice in the Yangtze Basin could now support consumers hundreds of kilometers away. A merchant in the north could purchase products from regions he would never personally visit. Economic activity that had once been regional became increasingly integrated across the empire. As wealth expanded, another challenge emerged. How could such a vast territory be governed effectively? Chinese rulers developed one of the most sophisticated bureaucratic systems in the pre-modern world. Through the imperial examination system, ambitious scholars spent years mastering classical texts in hopes of earning government positions. The process was demanding, competitive, and often unforgiving. Imagine a young student studying late into the night by the light of an oil lamp. His family's savings have been invested in his education. Relatives speak quietly about the future he might secure for them. Success could elevate an entire lineage. Failure could erase years of sacrifice. Across the empire, thousands pursued the same goal. Most would never obtain high office, but enough succeeded to help create an administrative class capable of governing a population unlike anything most contemporary states attempted to manage. Officials supervised taxation, maintained records, organized infrastructure projects, and enforced policies across enormous distances. Their work was not always efficient, nor was it free from corruption, but it provided something every expanding economy desperately needed: predictability. Merchants invest more confidently when roads are secure. Farmers produce more when taxation is relatively stable. Trade flourishes when contracts, records, and regulations can be enforced. Over time, state capacity and commercial growth reinforced one another. A stronger economy generated greater tax revenues. Greater revenue supported administration. Administration helped maintain stability. Stability encouraged further economic expansion. By the beginning of the Song Dynasty in 960, these foundations had been building for centuries. Agricultural output was rising. Trade networks stretched across Asia. Population continued to grow. Technological innovation accelerated. The stage was set for one of the most remarkable economic expansions in human history. What followed would make Song China not merely prosperous, but arguably the wealthiest civilization the world had yet seen. By the 11th century, the foundations laid by generations of farmers, engineers, merchants, and administrators began producing results on a scale that astonished contemporaries. China was no longer simply a large empire. It was becoming the economic center of the known world. One of the most important developments arrived from the south. No-car varieties of fast-ripening rice, introduced through connections with regions in present-day Vietnam, spread across parts of the empire. Farmers quickly recognized their value. The crop matured faster, adapted well to different conditions, and in many areas allowed multiple harvests within a single year. The effect was cumulative rather than immediate. Each successful harvest supported more people. More people created larger markets. Larger markets encouraged greater specialization and commercial activity. By the 12th century, China's population may have exceeded 100 million, making it one of the most populous societies on Earth. Numbers alone, however, do not explain wealth. The real transformation occurred when agricultural abundance began feeding an increasingly urban and commercial society. Cities expanded at extraordinary rates. Kaifeng became one of the largest urban centers in the world. Later, Hangzhou would grow even larger. Visitors encountered neighborhoods devoted to particular industries, warehouses filled with goods from distant provinces, and markets crowded with merchants whose businesses stretched across thousands of kilometers. Unlike many medieval cities elsewhere, economic activity did not end when the sun went down. Night markets remained active. Restaurants served travelers at late hours. Entertainers performed for paying audiences. Commercial life operated with an intensity that surprised foreign observers. The prosperity visible in these cities rested upon a deeper transformation taking place throughout the economy. Manufacturing expanded dramatically. Chinese workshops produced textiles, ceramics, paper, lacquerware, metal goods, and countless other products for both domestic and foreign markets. Among the most important industries was iron production. By the late 11th century, Chinese foundries were producing iron at levels that would not be matched in Europe for centuries. Iron tools increased agricultural efficiency. Iron equipment improved transportation and construction. Iron weapons strengthened military capabilities. The metal touched nearly every aspect of economic life. Such production required enormous quantities of fuel. As demand increased, forests near major industrial centers came under growing pressure. In response, some producers increasingly turned toward coal. The transition did not create a modern industrial revolution, but it demonstrated something important about Song China. Innovation was becoming embedded within the system. When economic growth created problems, merchants, craftsmen, engineers, and officials searched for solutions. That same pattern appeared in another area where Song China was centuries ahead of much of the world: finance. For generations, commerce had depended largely on copper coinage. As trade expanded, transporting large quantities of currency became increasingly impractical. Merchants moving significant wealth often required carts simply to carry enough coins for major transactions. The solution emerged gradually through commercial experimentation. Private institutions began issuing certificates representing stored value. Eventually, the state became involved, creating some of the earliest government-backed paper money in history. For a merchant conducting business across multiple provinces, the innovation was transformative. Risk declined, transactions accelerated, commercial networks expanded. Today, paper currency feels ordinary. In the 11th century, it represented a remarkable financial breakthrough. Yet perhaps the most underestimated force behind China's prosperity was not iron, rice, or paper money. It was information. Centuries before the printing press transformed Europe, China had already developed sophisticated printing technologies. During the Song period, books became more affordable and accessible than ever before. Government records, commercial manuals, educational texts, maps, calendars, and scholarly works circulated through growing networks of production and exchange. Knowledge traveled more efficiently. Officials could access information more easily. Merchants could keep better records. Students preparing for examinations gained access to a wider range of texts. Economic growth was being supported not only by physical infrastructure, but by intellectual infrastructure as well. By some modern estimates, Song China may have accounted for roughly a quarter or more of global economic output. Exact calculations remain debated, and historians continue to argue over the numbers. What is far less controversial is the broader picture. No contemporary state matched the scale of Song China's economy. While many European kingdoms remained relatively fragmented and overwhelmingly, rural China possessed enormous cities, advanced commercial networks, sophisticated financial institutions, and a productive agricultural base capable of supporting them all. Wealth flowed through the empire in extraordinary quantities, and increasingly, it flowed beyond the empire as well. Merchants carried Chinese silk, porcelain, metal goods, books, medicines, and luxury products across Asia. Foreign traders traveled long distances seeking access to Chinese markets. Demand for Chinese goods became so strong that entire commercial systems adapted themselves around it. The richer China became, the more valuable access to China became.
Yet prosperity created vulnerabilities of its own.
To neighboring powers, the wealth concentrated within the Song realm represented both an opportunity and a temptation. Beyond the northern frontiers, rival states watched carefully. Diplomatic agreements brought temporary stability, but the balance remained fragile. The prosperity that filled markets and warehouses also financed armies, fortifications, and defensive campaigns. Maintaining security became increasingly expensive as external pressures intensified. Then, during the early 12th century, a crisis emerged that threatened everything the Song had built. A powerful new force from the north would challenge the dynasty, capture its capital, and force millions to adapt to a dramatically changed world. What followed could easily have destroyed China's economic rise. Instead, it would redirect it in a way that made Chinese wealth even more influential across the wider world. In 1127, the unimaginable happened. Jurchen armies captured Kaifeng during the event historians now call the Jingkang Incident. The emperor was taken prisoner. Members of the imperial family were carried north. The capital that had symbolized Song prosperity for generations fell into enemy hands. To many observers, it looked like the end. Dynasties had collapsed before. Great powers had vanished before. There seemed little reason to believe the Song would survive such a catastrophe. Yet survival is not always determined by armies alone. The wealth that China had accumulated over centuries rested upon deeper foundations than a single capital city. Agricultural productivity remained immense. Commercial networks continued to function. Skilled craftsmen, merchants, scholars, and officials carried their knowledge southward as millions migrated beyond the Yangtze River. The dynasty retreated, reorganized, and established a new capital at Hangzhou. What followed was one of history's most remarkable economic recoveries. By the 13th century, Hangzhou had become one of the largest and wealthiest cities on earth. Visitors encountered miles of busy streets, markets crowded with merchants from across Asia, bridges packed with travelers, warehouses overflowing with goods, and restaurants serving customers long after sunset. Commercial activity extended so far into the night that parts of the city seemed almost permanently awake. Foreign travelers struggled to describe what they saw. Among them was Marco Polo, whose later accounts portrayed Hangzhou as one of the finest cities in the world. Historians continue to debate aspects of his writings, but the broader impression was accurate. Few cities anywhere could rival Hangzhou's scale, sophistication, or economic energy. The center of Chinese wealth was increasingly turning toward the sea. Ports such as Quanzhou became gateways to a vast maritime trading network that connected China with Southeast Asia, India, the Middle East, and East Africa. Arab merchants, Persian traders, and sailors from across the Indian Ocean arrived seeking access to Chinese markets. The goods moving through these ports reflected the extraordinary diversity of the Song economy. Silk, porcelain, lacquerware, printed books, medicines, metal goods, and countless other products flowed outward. In return came spices, precious materials, exotic commodities, and commercial opportunities that further enriched Chinese merchants. For centuries, the Silk Roads had connected China to distant markets. Now maritime trade was becoming equally important. The world was growing more interconnected, and China sat at the center of many of those connections. That position attracted admiration. It also attracted conquest. In the early 13th century, the Mongols emerged from the Eurasian steppe under Genghis Khan and began constructing the largest contiguous land. Empire in history. Their armies transformed the political map of Eurasia with astonishing speed. Eventually, they turned their attention toward the wealthy lands of southern China. The struggle lasted decades. Song rulers possessed immense resources, fortified cities, and one of the world's most productive economies. The Mongols possessed extraordinary military capabilities and strategic flexibility. Neither side achieved victory quickly. When the Song Dynasty finally fell in 1279, the conquerors inherited something priceless. They inherited the richest civilization of its age. The Mongols did not create China's prosperity. They recognized its value and sought to benefit from it. Under the Yuan dynasty, trade expanded across much of Eurasia. Routes linking East Asia, Central Asia, the Middle East, and Europe became more integrated than they had been for centuries. Chinese goods reached distant consumers. Foreign merchants gained greater access to Chinese markets. Knowledge, technologies, and ideas moved alongside commercial exchange. Even after dynasties changed, the economic foundations built over centuries continued to shape the world. By some estimates, China accounted for roughly a quarter or more of global economic output during significant portions of the medieval and early modern eras. Precise figures remain impossible to verify, but the larger reality is clear. For much of human history, China was not a peripheral economy. It was one of the central engines of global wealth. Its rise had not been driven by a single emperor, invention, or conquest. Instead, it emerged from centuries of accumulated decisions. Farmers transformed landscapes through irrigation and cultivation. Engineers connected distant regions through canals and infrastructure. Merchants linked markets across continents. Administrators governed populations on a scale few states could match. Inventors developed technologies that increased productivity, communication, and exchange. Together, these forces produced something extraordinary. Long before the modern age, China built one of the most sophisticated economic systems the world had ever seen. The wealth it generated reshaped trade routes, attracted foreign merchants, financed powerful states, and influenced societies far beyond its borders. The richest civilization on Earth was not created overnight. It was built harvest by harvest, canal by canal, workshop by workshop, and generation by generation. And for centuries, while much of the world searched for wealth, an extraordinary share of it was already flowing through the cities, rivers, ports, and markets of China.